Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Altmed podcast. My name is Andrew Dowling. For those who don't know, with me as always, my co-host Mitch Kurtz. And we are delighted today because we have a trailblazer in our midst. We have the co-founder of United in Compassion, Australia's peak medical cannabis body. We have Lucy Haslam here. So Lucy, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Andrew and Mitch. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, we've got so much to talk about, but perhaps before we dive into some of our prickly questions, we might get you to talk about your story and how you came to be involved in the medical cannabis space.
Okay. So that takes me back to 2014, I suppose. My route into medical cannabis was very unfortunate, really. I have three sons. I had three sons. My youngest was Daniel, and he was 20 when he was diagnosed with stage 4 bowel cancer out of the blue. So that was pretty horrific, and it really rocked our family. And for 4 years, he'd had really grueling treatment, lots of chemotherapy, almost continuous chemotherapy, actually. He'd had a lot of surgery. We'd sent him to Germany for oncothermia. And so by 2014, he was really in a pretty bad state. Nothing much was helping him in terms of dealing with his symptoms and side effects. He really wasn't coping at all with chemotherapy. And a friend of his, who was also a bowel cancer sufferer and a local businessman in Tamworth, suggested to Dan that he try cannabis and said that he had some cannabis left over from his partner, giving it to him when he was having his chemotherapy. But Dan, being the kid he was, said no, Mum and Dad will never come at that. He knew that we were pretty opposed to cannabis, recreational cannabis. And really, to be honest, I was very naive about the therapeutic benefits of cannabis then. It was just something that wasn't really much on the radar of anyone, particularly in Australia. And so when Dan said no, his friend luckily phoned me. And we were pretty desperate by that stage watching Dan. And so we decided that we would encourage him to try it. And really that's what got me involved in medical cannabis, because the first day Dan tried it, when he was having chemotherapy, he called his dad and said, "Dad, come and do your thing." My husband had been in the police force for 35 years and most of that time in the drug squad. So he'd rolled a few joints in his undercover years, and he rolled Dan a joint, and we all sort of sat around and watched Dan. So he had his vomit bag in one hand and a joint in the other, and he had a couple of puffs on his cannabis, and it was quite amazing. The color came back into his face instantly, really, and within a few minutes he was feeling better and asked for something to eat, which was pretty amazing, because at that time the only way he dealt with his chemotherapy round was to be put into hospital and to stay on a drip in the dark for a few days. He wouldn't eat, he wouldn't drink, he wouldn't talk to anyone, wouldn't move, basically. And that was the only way we'd manage. So all of a sudden, he felt like he had his life back to an extent. He had some control, and it just helped him so much that we just thought, wow, this is something we can't ignore as parents. And obviously, if he wanted to continue, we had to continue to procure it illegally, which was something that I didn't feel good about. And so kind of unknowingly, I guess, I just decided that it was time to really raise this issue publicly and try and get some support around reintroducing cannabis for people like Dan with terminal illness. So that's how it started, and it hasn't really stopped since then. Even though Dan didn't survive, he passed away in 2015, but really things were pretty positive, looking pretty positive politically, just prior to his death. And he did say to me, would I continue to fight until all Australian patients could have access that was, safe, easy, affordable, all those things. And so that was kind of a promise I made to him, and that's why I've continued to work in the area since it was legalised.
That's an amazing story, Lucy, and we're so glad for your advocacy, which has paved the way for many Australians to gain access, although it would seem that when you qualified it by saying easy, perhaps the fight still goes on, really. But I just wanted to ask, picking up on that, I mean, your husband being in the drug squad and all of that, was it quite a paradigm shift in your family to kind of come from? Yeah, it's such a crazy
Absolutely.
story.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even though I'd done nursing, basically all I'd been taught was that it was a dangerous gateway drug that caused schizophrenia. And I realise now that has been the experience of most healthcare professionals in Australia until now. It was really hard for me to get my head around it, but I couldn't ignore the relief that it gave Dan. And he commented that he finally felt that he had some control back. I mean, he'd tried every antiemetic that was available to him, and nothing got his head out of the toilet. He was in this constant battle of trying to maintain weight, but really rapidly losing weight. He was in pain. He had massive mouth ulcers, and shortly after he started vaporizing cannabis, like everyone, we hit the internet and I started to research, I guess. And Dan did the same. And he very quickly said to me, look, Mum, people are using cannabis to try and kill their cancer. And I want to try that too. I don't want it just to stop me vomiting. I want to try and kill my cancer. And, so we used the Rick Simpson method. I bought poundage of cannabis on the black market. In fear and trepidation, really, and we had a very sick, a terminally ill young man out in the back shed all hours of the night with his lab coat on, because he had a great sense of humor, but cooking up cannabis to make himself some cannabis oil to try and kill his cancer. I mean, it was quite surreal, really.
Yeah.
But the thing about going public, which we did quite early on, through our local community at first, and then sort of through our local politicians, I really didn't know how people would respond to us. I thought they would either crucify us or they'd support us, but I wasn't sure which. And we were so supported. It was amazing. Even people like our local police, the police chief, he came out very quickly and very publicly supporting us, all the local councillors and the mayor and local businesses, and every shop window in Tamworth just about had a big poster up saying, we're doing it for Dan, it's time to reintroduce medical cannabis. And it was that groundswell of support. And it was also other families that then sort of felt a little bit encouraged to tell their own story. And that's when we started hearing about so many children with intractable forms of epilepsy, and their parents were using it for them with great effect. And it really it did definitely take on a life of its own. It wasn't all planned and measured. It literally just took off. And I did a change.org petition, and it went on to become one of Australia's biggest petitions. So wow. I think the Australian public got it, and I think we're past that idea of thinking of cannabis just as weed and just as a recreational drug. And finally, I think several years later, people are starting to see it as medicine. But as you said, there's still a lot of hurdles, and we still have a long way to go.
Absolutely.
So I'm just trying to think about the state of mind that you would have been in when you're saying they were cooking it out in the back shed kind of thing. Obviously, we know a lot more, at least, about cannabis strains and the assay or the concentration of THC and the different chemovars that might be out there now. But I'm thinking back to when this was occurring. I imagine you wouldn't have had much of an idea of what type of cannabis you had, if it was high in CBD or THC or what. And then coupled with that, the feeling you must have had looking across, I don't want to say the pond, but across the world at, say, like Europe or America or Canada, where things were quite a lot more accessible and a lot more available, and the knowledge base in those areas being so much more vast. Just curious how that kind of felt in the backyard in far north.
It was really frustrating. So I obviously, my nursing instincts and my mother's instincts were first I had to check that it wasn't going to do Dan any harm. And I remember I contacted Dr. Alex Wodak very early on. I tracked him down. I'd seen that he'd made some submissions to the Senate inquiry in New South Wales the year before. So that was 2013. And look, I read every submission to that inquiry, and basically it unanimously recommended that cannabis be reintroduced for medical purposes. But the health minister at the time was Gillian Skinner, and she was very opposed to cannabis, and she just said an outright no. So, you know, I realized that this was very political, and I kind of made a point of trying to meet the New South Wales Premier at the time, Mike Baird, which we did. I took Dan down to Sydney and we had a meeting with Mike, and he was so compassionate. It was, you know, there were quite a few tears in his office that day, and he sat and he listened to Dan's story, and, you know, he really felt very compelled to do something about it. And, you know, it was only a couple of years later, he invited me to go to Israel with him to see what they were doing in Israel, because I kept telling him that Israel was so far ahead of us, you know, that we were lonely. And so eventually he did take that step and went over there. And, you know, we had the honor of meeting Raphael Meshulam and Daddy Mary, and, you know, hearing firsthand really all about the endocannabinoid system and the science that really had been in this vacuum. And, you know, and I think that really just, you know, that spurred Mike Baird on. And despite Minister Gillian Skinner, he went ahead for New South Wales and said, look, I'm going to make this happen for people like Dan. And then of course I realized, oh, well, I guess I've got to go to Canberra now. And, you know, at the invitation of Richard Di Natale, who was the head of the Greens, I went down there. I spoke in Parliament. It was my first time in Canberra, and first time in Parliament. It was fairly nerve-wracking, but
wow.
There was a really big turnout that day. And, you know, Richard Di Natale was sort of surprised how many MPs had come along to hear about medical cannabis. And it was off the back of that they formed a cross-party committee and put together the Regulator of Medicinal Cannabis Bill in 2014. So, you know, all of a sudden, you know, within a few months, things were really taking off. And yeah, and, you know, and really, you know, politics got a little bit ugly at that stage, I guess. And there was a fair bit of politicking going on between the incumbent government, the coalition government, who were part of this cross-party committee, but they wanted a government bill. They didn't want a cross-party bill. And really, so it was sort of the 11th hour that, you know, there was I was, I guess, very naive to the politics of it. And I agreed with Susan Lee, who was the health minister, that, you know, if I could convince the Labor Party not to require it to go to committee, they would legalise cannabis on the first anniversary of Dan's death. And
wow.
For me as a mum, that really tugged at my heartstrings, and I really didn't understand the complexities of it. And so I went along with that and convinced Labor not to require it to go to committee. And then, you know, law was passed all of a sudden with absolutely no regulation written. And then we had to sit and wait for those 8 months to see what they came up with. And really, quite frankly, I think everybody that's been involved in the industry knows that what they came up with was really, it had stopped talking about compassion and access and had started talking about regulation and control. And that was what we then had to battle for several years. And, you know, there's still many patients now that are battling the remnants of that very tightly controlled, over-controlled situation that we have.
It's really interesting that just your comments around what was going on in Canberra at that time. I know that here in Victoria, Dan Andrews, I think in early 2016, passed the Access to Medical Cannabis Act. But I guess, yeah, if we had waited in Australia for all the parties to get on board with a bill that they, you know, would that have, do you think, created a better system for us all to work within now?
Oh, look, I definitely think that had the Regulator of Medicinal Cannabis Bill, which was put together by that cross-party committee, had that been enacted, we would have been in a far better place, because really what that did was it appreciated that cannabis was not like other pharmaceuticals. It was not like, single molecules created in the lab. It realized that trying to administer cannabis through the TGA, as we are doing, is like fitting a square peg into a round hole. And when those regulations first came out, there was a journalist, I think by the name of Christina Barrow, and she did a flow chart of what was required to achieve access. And it was so good. I said to her, could I have a copy of that and use it? And she said, absolutely. And I got that printed into a poster, and really to show the flow chart of requirements to access cannabis, I had to stand on the table to hold it up.
I think I remember seeing this in Greenlight in the film. Is there a scene where that particular flow chart is used? I think.
Yeah, I think they might have used it. I called a meeting really just to concerned people. When we saw the regulations, and we saw, we started to see how state governments were intervening, and patients might find a doctor to do their application, and they'd be approved federally, but they might be knocked back by the state government, and for all manner of reasons that were just completely incredible. And I called this meeting, I think it was 2017, around then, to say, look, if you're interested in medical cannabis and you think that we need to do something about the access, come to this meeting. Well, we outgrew the meeting room 3 times, and we ended up having a huge meeting in Sydney. We had researchers and academics, we had doctors, we had cannabis companies, we had, everybody in between, just saying, what the hell, it wasn't about access, it was about control. And that was just so glaringly obvious to all of us. And it was really that kind of group that I then went on to form the Australian Medicinal Cannabis Association 18 months or so ago. And a lot of those people that were on that group joined the association because we realised, even this far down the track, that it's not any one area that needs revision. It's across lots of areas. So it involves education of health professionals, it involves regulation, it involves ways to try and control the cost through increasing competition, and through, cannabis is in a regulatory limbo now. It's approved, yet it's unapproved. It's not listed on the ARTG. It can't be subsidised on the PBS. And the only ones that suffer from all of this are the patients that are trying to get access and that have to bear the full cost.
Absolutely. So, I mean, many of our listeners, I'm sure, will have, been through the patient flow of going and seeing their doctor, having to wait for an application to be lodged with the special access scheme administered by the TGA, and then wait for potentially their doctor to also get a Schedule 8 permit, depending on what's being prescribed. And I think most medical cannabis products would fall in the Schedule 8. I think, can we sort of unscramble the egg is what comes to my mind, because I just think it really is a bit of a regulatory mess. I mean, the safety of these particular products is very well understood, seemingly. We might be still at the research edges with respect to efficacy in treating conditions, but the safety and the tolerance of these is something that I think, should inform it getting a slightly different treatment. But for the time being, we're stuck. But I see that the TGA has recently just put up a big list of, products and to help doctors with prescribing decisions, and that was previously not allowed. And it's all a bit crazy, isn't it?
So I've got.
Sorry.
No, that's all right. I was just going to say, thinking about the long journey in terms of access, and thinking about where it started and that sheet that you would hold, on the table. How do you find it now in terms of the barriers to entry? Because there's some people that still report the difficulty that, many people had day one. There's other people that report it being quite simple to go to, an online telehealth platform, get their cannabis in the mail, that week kind of thing. How do you feel it's sitting in
Have
the
we got
current...
the A1 down to an A4 or an A5 size flowchart, or are we still a long way away from that?
Look, I mean, it's definitely easier, but I would say that there are some people that were disadvantaged in 2014 that are still disadvantaged now. I mean, so there's no one addressing the extreme costs for children with intractable forms of epilepsy and the high quantities that they are requiring. I mean, it's people like that. It's people that have to literally work full time to be able to afford their medicine, to be able to work full time. I think we are getting there, but like you're saying, we're trying to unscramble the mess. And I think we started off with the wrong system. Now, I mean, there'll be many in the cannabis industry that say, oh, well, we've lived through this system. We've had to adhere to this regulation and achieve these high standards and high costs and whatever, and we don't want to go back where other people may have an advantage. I appreciate that, but by the same token, I think the government needs to admit that they got it wrong and show some interest in trying to improve things, because I think the simple fact is that from where I sit, I still see that even though approvals are going up exponentially, I still believe that most Australian patients access their cannabis through the green market, black market.
That's absolutely. I think the Lambert Initiative published data on that indicates that more than 95% of medical cannabis consumed in Australia is black market.
So I think that's got to be the yardstick by which we measure the success or failure of this. And, most people don't want to do the wrong thing. They don't want to be breaking the law.
Yeah.
But they do it out of necessity. Like today I spent the day doing a submission to the Royal Commission into Veteran Suicides because DVA will not fund cannabis for veterans with PTSD because it's a mental health condition. Now, they're the ones that actually need access
the most
urgently because they're at high risk of suicide, and that's what the Royal Commission's all about. So it's that kind of thing that really adversely affects, particular individuals. And, one thing I've learned about politicians is they don't ever like to admit that they got it wrong. And, there'll be all sorts of ducking and weaving. And I guess I'm not liked and respected much in Canberra now because I really can't congratulate the government too much on what they've done, because even things like the changes to the TGA that, came in only a couple of weeks ago, I would expect that they were probably made really to try and simplify and lighten the burden of the huge numbers of applications through the special access scheme. Rather than trying to streamline things or make things easier for patients.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I think while incumbent governments don't like to admit they were wrong, their political opponents find it very easy to do. So perhaps if there was to be a change in the federal government, given that we have an elections looming next year, do you think that we might actually see any leadership in this policy area, or do you feel as though the politicians might for now be saying, well, we've given it to you, we've given you access,
that's been the mantra. And I pretty much think they're all tarred with one brush. And unfortunately, I think COVID has given them the hugest get out of jail free card for the last couple of years. They've been able to dismiss anything pretty much, we fought really hard for a Senate inquiry into the barriers to patient access. And, the government didn't want that inquiry. They objected and tried not to allow it, but, it was passed. We won that. We had that inquiry. The findings were released in 2018 and the government's largely ignored them.
Yeah.
So
lazy reply as well, I felt. It was very, anyway, I think they gave, was it last year that they issued their reply, perhaps maybe 2019, I'm not sure.
I think it was the year before. So COVID's given them the greatest excuse, to ignore everything. But, they don't think it through. They think it's being, it's their right to have all this control. But really, who are they trying to help? I mean, like I say, the word compassion evaporated almost as quickly as the law was changed.
Well, we see that reflected in the driving laws as well, which I know we can,
absolutely.
we can do an entire episode on, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that, we are so outdated in our in the way we think about driving. I mean, there is literally no test for impairment. I mean, it's got nothing to do with impairment. We have an unlevel playing field where patients can be on other much more impairing medications legally prescribed, and they can still drive. They're not tested for them. It's left to the patient to determine whether they're impaired or not. But yet, like so many other things with cannabis, that's not the approach. It's just the mere presence of THC in your system, and it's an automatic loss of license. So, for many patients, the decision of, do I relieve my symptoms or do I have access to be able to drive, to attend doctor's appointments, to shop, to go to work, so there's still not that, there's that disparity. There's a reason why patients are kind of reluctant to even try medical cannabis, where they actually could be much better drivers if they were, relieving the symptoms of pain or spasm or whatever the condition is that they seek to treat. So
you asked a question,
anxiety,
Lucy, that I'm just curious about, which you said, who is it helping? We know it's obviously not helping Australian patients. I mean, I've sort of long speculated that, particular political parties and politicians within parties hold very conservative ideological views, and potentially those are the people that drive the kind of the counter to the medical cannabis movement. Just interested in your experiences dealing with legislators or politicians. What is that movement? Because we saw that movement defeat the referendum in New Zealand by 52 to 48. There were religious groups, there are others. Have you encountered opposition in all of your advocacy to date, and where does it come from in Australia? I'm just curious.
Well, definitely yes, particularly in those early days. Religious groups, I think Family First, and
they need it the most anyway.
Look, there were a couple of groups that were really savage to Dan personally. There were some groups that were circulating publications within their groups that ended up being sent to me, where they were showing a photo of Dan and saying, how dangerous cannabis was, and this kid just thinks it's fine to smoke weed, and and I spent quite a lot of my time emailing these people and saying, look, you have no concept of what this is about. It's really lack of education. And to be honest, that was kind of why I put on the first symposium in 2014 when I did, because it was just so clear to me that the negativity and the biases were born of ignorance. And I mean, let's face it, we kind of all were hoodwinked in this country, as many other places across the world were, with the prohibition of cannabis back in the 30s. If you understand the history of prohibition, you can't really hold on to those biases. And if you understand the science of the endocannabinoid system, you would be foolish. You would absolutely look like an uneducated person if you were arguing that cannabis is dangerous in the way that we were taught back in, when I went to training in the late 70s. There's we've learnt so much, but I think there are people that are willing to listen, when they admit that they don't know, but there are also people that don't know what they don't know, and they don't want to know what they don't know. And unfortunately, that's been the case, I think, of a lot of health professionals. And so, you know, that's another aspect where education is key, where it's important to spend time lobbying groups like, you know, nurses associations and you know, even the medical bodies, which, let's face it, every now and then you see something come out of the pain faculty and you just think, oh my goodness, you know, they're recommending alcohol over cannabis and saying that's preferred medicine for people in pain.
I invited that guy to come on Altmed actually, and yeah, he claimed we were industry funded, and you know, he was obviously you know, a wonderful citizen that, you know, all this sort of stuff. I was just like, well, look, we're not. For anyone listening, Mitch and I do this voluntarily, as does Lucy. So yeah, tried to explain that, and I said, look, from our point of view, it would be great for our audience to hear the kind of the counterpoint. You know, if you've got a strong opinion against cannabis, we're actually interested in exploring that, because we really just want to talk about it from all sides. But yeah, that invitation still open, by the way, Professor Michael Vag, if you're interested. And you know, I'm interested if you've actually had people like that come to the United in Compassion Symposium and actually sort of change their mind in the course of the event. I can't imagine Family First coming to your event, but yeah, if you had people come along and say, you know what, I was actually a bit skeptical, and you know, this was actually really interesting for me.
Yeah, look, absolutely, definitely. There have been people like that. You know, there have been people I know that have even come along to things like screenings of High as Mike or A Life of Its Own and gone, wow, you know, I feel like I've been under a rock, you know. I mean, contrary to what people like Barnaby Joyce think, we are not trying to give people false hope. We are not trying to talk something up that doesn't exist. We are really honing down to what is the actual science. Why does cannabis work for so many conditions? You know, that was one of the first questions that I asked myself, and I was hungry to know the answer, because right in front of me, I saw my dying son feeling very much better. You know, I would never have even embarked on this journey had he not had that success. And, you know, over the years, I've probably met hundreds of patients now who've had stories equally as compelling as Daniel. I mean, people like Olivia Newton-John, who's now become a friend. Her story is absolutely compelling.
Right.
And if we are going to disrespect people and pass their lived experiences off as just being anecdotal and of no significance or relevance because it doesn't equal the evidence of a randomized double-blind controlled trial, which hasn't been done because it was prohibited for so long and because it's so expensive. You know, like, what do we value in life if we don't value making sick people feel better?
Exactly. Like what, you know, kind of better reason or motivation to actually get out and, you know, advocate and campaign on behalf of it's a very great cause. And what, you know, more to life is there than that? I completely agree. I just realized we've been talking about the symposium, and perhaps some of our listeners might not be familiar with it. I know it's, you know, obviously much to a lot of people's delight, was the news that it will be going ahead, hopefully in May next year, you know, touch wood. But can you maybe tell our audience just a little bit about the event and what they could expect to see there? Because I'm sure some of our listeners might be interested in attending.
Sure. So this will be about the 5th URC symposium that we've held. We started in 2014 with some money I'd raised really to support a private members bill that wasn't required. So the best thing I thought I could do with that money would be to put it into education. And we had the first symposium in Tamworth, which was prior to legalisation. And I got people like the Sydney University guys came along, and we had lots of international guests. It resulted in them getting that huge donation of $33.7 million to kick off
from the Lambert family.
From
wow,
the
that was
family.
from okay, interesting.
First symposium. So that occurred, and then I just realized that there was so much value in running these events, and so literally I look around the world and find the speakers that I think would add the most value and interest to talk to the important topics like epilepsy or PTSD or cancer, and now we're able to engage with a lot of Australian researchers because there's a hell of a lot going on in Australia as well. So we bring them to one central place, and over several days we have a general symposium. This year's the first time we've added an industry program. So looking specifically at, all the things that are involved in the medicinal cannabis industry, because our sponsorship is mainly coming from industry now, which is fantastic. This year is also the first year that we've had an Australian Medicinal Cannabis Nurses Conference. So that's being sponsored by the ANMF, which is the federal nursing body, and all the state and territory bodies, which over the past few years, I've been lobbying them quite hard and working with them, and they've all endorsed medicinal cannabis as a treatment option that should be available to Australian patients. So that's significant as well.
That's awesome, Lucy, because I've realized like nurse practitioners can prescribe it. So, having that specific.
But not in every state. And that's.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, we're currently working with the Tasmanian nurse practitioners who are not allowed to prescribe in Tasmania.
Come on, Tassie.
Yeah. So, like everything, there's disparity between the states. And, how do you tackle that? One step at a time. It's just looking for fires and trying to put them out and trying to provide solutions to keep it moving forward. But and then the other thing that we do at the symposium is we hold specific training for healthcare professionals. So this year will be a bit of a first. Dr. David Caldecott, who is from the ACT, he wrote several years ago a medicinal cannabis training course, completely independent of industry, and he gifted that to United in Compassion. And now basically we're gifting that to the Australian chapter of the Society of Cannabis Clinicians to try and grow that course to be truly independent, truly brand agnostic. It's got nothing to, because we still get, skepticism from within the medical profession who are reluctant to do any education in cannabis if it's being sponsored by industry. So we're feeling that that's very important, that we provide high quality education. We're a sister or a chapter of the American-based Society of Cannabis Clinicians, and they have excellent education over there. So that's what we're trying to create specifically for Australia. So we'll also run that program for healthcare professionals.
Shout out to Dr. Joel Wren. We've had him on Altmed. So I love the work that they're doing there.
Is that part of the educational grant that we might be able to touch on?
Yeah, look, this is a bit of a news flash, really. Obviously, such an education course is expensive. And so United in Compassion is a charitable organisation. So our hope really is to start an unrestricted educational grant which will really be, for me, I guess a bit of icing on the cake in that it will be in Dan's memory. So it will be a grant where we can fund education, which is going to be provided and developed by the Society of Cannabis Clinicians, independent of industry. So so that's a major project for the new year. We're just sort of getting the backbones of that into shape at the moment. And even part of that grant, I would love to see having a remembrance wall or an honour wall where families who have lost loved ones or who have loved ones still alive that are benefiting from cannabis might like to contribute, a smaller amount and really have their loved one focus and have their story given a platform. So there's going to be lots of cogs to that wheel, and it's a big project. It's something I actually tried to do a couple of years ago, but unfortunately I trusted somebody to do that who wasn't particularly trustworthy and lost $50,000 in the process and got nothing out of it. So it's been a very hard lesson, but it's something that I'm quite determined to do. And I think who better to do it than the Society of Cannabis Clinicians. If we can have that major fundraise, for which we will require probably around $100,000, $110,000 to get that kick started. But we will run it as a not-for-profit. So any income that it derives from selling the course, and we'll keep the costs quite low, will be reinvested into further development of the course. So we see it as something that will be an enduring educational program that will be continuously expanded as the research around the world continues into medical cannabis.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fact that the American chapter and all of these different parts of this movement globally are communicating research findings from their own jurisdiction. I think it's a great vehicle to do it. And I should say thank you for choosing Altmed to drop that breaking news. Remember, for all our listeners, to tune in to Altmed for the latest stories. But yeah, I wanted to ask actually just I know we'll be wrapping up soon, but I wanted to just get a sense from you about what you see for the future of medical cannabis in Australia, and whether there's I don't know if you spend much of your time looking abroad at some of the parts of the world where it's been legalized for a bit longer, so they might be a bit further ahead on their particular journey. I've seen actually there's been a lot of people getting fired in Canada in the industry over there. So they're I think their industry is going through some interesting times of late. But just what's your sense of the future direction in Australia?
Look, I think there's a few things. There's obviously access has got to continue to improve. And I think that we will probably be dragging the regulators kicking and screaming to do that. But I think at the end of the day, there's research going on around the world, and I think things are looking up. I think there's things like, I know there's a couple of court cases that might be happening in Australia where people are being sacked from their employment because they've been legally prescribed and declared that they're using medical cannabis products, even things like CBD, which are completely unimpairing. I think public opinion will force the issue of driving to the table, and perhaps that will be a political issue. I think, I try not to look too far ahead because it's quite exhausting, to be honest. I hope personally to wind up a few things through getting this education up and running, and getting organisations like the Australian Medicinal Cannabis Association to a point where they can be, more powerful in their advocacy and in their lobbying. So basically I can take a back step and enjoy my grandchildren.
I was just about to say, Lucy, that one of the things that we could probably safely bet on is that whatever is happening in the future, you'll be front and center, just as you have been. So will the likes of, Fiona Patton, Reece Cohen. But yeah, I think there's still so much more advocacy to do, but it's probably, you've, I'm sure, earned a bit of a break from it all, and to hand the mantle to others to continue the fight for easy access to these products.
Yeah, look, I think, I didn't intend to still be here doing this, to be honest. But for me, it's a way of keeping connected with Daniel and honouring his legacy. And at the moment, I'm not happy to leave it where it is. I think there's a lot that still can be done. I think the future is looking much brighter. I think if we can skip ahead a few years, we'll be in a much better place. If we can potentially lose a generation of doctors, and that sounds harsh, but I think that we might be in a better place. I see young doctors coming through with an enthusiasm and vigor that's not replicated in probably the older generation. And that's not disrespectful to them. It's just that they haven't been educated, and perhaps they're at a point in their careers where education is not really something that they want to do. They're just more content to stick with, what they've been doing in the past. But I think, if we look back to SBS Insight did a program back in 2014 or 2015, and it was a complete dogfight. It was completely out of control. There was so much negativity and hostility. And I just think we're well past that now. And, the way we're going to get there is through individual patients telling their stories, still going to their local members if they're dissatisfied with how things are for them, and still being willing to, we need employers to advocate for their employees who are receiving that treatment. We need, nurses to make it easy for patients going into hospital to receive their treatment. Aged care homes, there's
Veterans Affairs. The list
Veterans
goes
Affairs,
on.
absolutely, Veterans Affairs.
Well, I think we're almost at time, but and I will have to watch that episode of Insight actually. So I'm just as a kind of a historical watershed moment, perhaps, to see what Australia was like in its views 7 years ago. But before we sign off, Mitch, did you have any more questions?
There was one thing I thought it might be nice to finish on a little story or an anecdote. And I know you mentioned something about a particular cannabis farm early in the piece. And I just wondered if you might share that story with some of our listeners.
Well, okay. Well, I guess I was trying to be a little bit strategic, and back in 2015, I'm going to say, my memory's getting a bit foggy now, but I'll say 2015, we actually opened the first Australian medicinal cannabis farm just outside of Tamworth, and it was opened by the acting Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce.
The beetroot himself.
And part of the reason that we did that was really to try and push the politics along, because we felt that if that could occur, which it did, with lots of media, that the government really couldn't renege on legalising medicinal cannabis. So Barnaby Joyce did open the first Australian cannabis farm. That wasn't to be. As my story played out, this is not about making money out of cannabis for me. This is about really just doing the right thing by Australian patients. And unfortunately, Barnaby Joyce did change his tune, like so many politicians do, and became very publicly opposed to medicinal cannabis, saying it was giving patients false hope. So that's a conversation that I would love to continue with Barnaby one day when he's feeling less aggressive.
When does that ever happen?
But it's certainly something that I think the Australian public should possibly be asking Barnaby Joyce in the lead up to the next election, where he actually stands.
Well, he's got, I'm just thinking, there's at least one I can think of company that would have a pretty large cultivation facility. I think it's in Armidale. Is that in his seat anyway?
Oh, yes, it is. And the there is a cannabis cultivation in Tamworth as well. So
it's time to get on board, Barnaby. But anyway, with that, we might wrap up. We could sort of talk to you for hours, Lucy, to be honest. So maybe we might do this again. But in any event, Mitch and I will be, delighted to meet you at the UIC Symposium next year. So we're looking forward to that. And just, again, want to say thank you so much for all of the work that you've done, but also just, taking the time to share your story. It's an amazing story, and you've continued the fight so well. And we're all the better for it. So thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you for having me. And I think the work that people like you are doing is really helping to normalise medicinal cannabis. And that's absolutely what Australian patients need. So thank you to you as well.
Oh, thanks, Lucy. Well,
thanks, Lucy. Appreciate it.
Until we see you in real life, take care.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Cheers.